Welcome to Labour CND's webinar, Nuclear Power, a Harmful Distraction to Climate Change. My name's Daniel. I'm a member of the Committee of Labour CND. CND members in campaigning in the Labour Party to promote CND and its core objectives. CND has had a long history of campaigning against nuclear power, and indeed Labour CND recently launched a new publication, Labour, Climate Change and Nuclear Power, Not Cheap, Not Safe, Not Peaceful. This webinar will look at the points made in the pamphlet and explore the renaissance in nuclear power being discussed elsewhere. It will lead off with an overview of Labour CND's pamphlet by Sam Mason, the principal author, and then we'll have contributions from our other panelists. Linda Clark will look at the construction side of the industry, and Dr. Phil Johnston will emphasise the links between civilian and defence nuclear projects, which is a key issue for CND. As opinions amongst environmentalists, the Labour movement, and even some anti-nuclear weapons campaigners remain divided on this, this is a pivotal moment to ensure a well-informed debate. We'll hear from our speakers and encourage participants to put any questions or comments in the Q&A function, which I hope you can see at the bottom of the screen. We'll come back to those questions later on in the event. Hopefully this won't be too long. People do find long meetings very exhausting, but we do hope there's time for some interaction with participants. Okay, so first, over to Sam Mason. Sam Mason is a trade union and climate activist and a trade union policy officer covering sustainability and climate change. She is part of the Labour CND committee and a vice chair of CND, and most importantly, as mentioned, she authored our recently published pamphlet. So over to Sam.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks to Labour CND. Obviously, I am part of Labour CND, but still great to be hosting this webinar tonight, and appreciate the time given to this. As Daniel just said, I'm going to open with a quick overview of the pamphlet, which of course we hope after this, if you've not read it already and bought a copy, you'll go away and do and help promote. But yeah, we published this last year ahead of the Labour Party conference, and whilst I'm named as the lead author on the pamphlet, I think I should and certainly do want to acknowledge the contribution of all members of the Labour CND Executive Committee who helped certainly improve the pamphlet and shape it into a resource which we hope will be useful in terms for anti-nuclear activists to use in the debate around nuclear power. And it's this debate which really lies behind the reason for why we wanted to write this pamphlet, and primarily the Labour Party policy to support nuclear power as a response to questions of energy security and, above all, climate change. And unfortunately, alongside the fossil fuel lobby, nuclear power enjoys its own significant backing, including within trade unions and the wider Labour movement, and something which I don't think we have sort of reminded in the pamphlet, but I just wanted to go back to, was at the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow, which seemed an age ago now, but where unions issued a joint statement saying that the climate fight needs nuclear and that we should not be cowed by outdated prejudice and pickled dogmas that would have us abandon nuclear. Now, that was obviously intended to be a particularly provocative statement at the COP climate talks, and I think for those who were in Glasgow saw the heavy presence of the nuclear lobby around the climate talks as well. But I think what it does is it undermines the very real and serious arguments against nuclear power based on around 70 years of experience of it. This isn't something that, you know, we're just coming to look at from a decade ago. We have a long time where we know of its dangers and its threats. But so as an introduction to the pamphlet, in the face of the two biggest threats to humanity, climate change and nuclear war, we set out that we're putting the argument that nuclear power, that there is no argument that nuclear power can rescue us, and that it's false and dangerous to support that position. And the pamphlet really starts from the premise of the conclusion arrived at by Tony Benn, who was, of course, a former Minister for Technology and Energy within the Labour government, who went from being a passionate supporter of nuclear power, or atoms for peace, as it's been called, to saying in 2008 that nothing in the world would now induce me to support nuclear power. It was a mistake. And why? Because, as Tony Benn discovered, nuclear power is not safe, is not cheap, and certainly not peaceful. And yet this seems to be a mistake we're set on repeating, as nuclear power is once again being touted as the solution to energy security and decarbonisation. So we've therefore started in the pamphlet with trying to obviously illustrate the extent of the climate crisis and the threat of climate catastrophe that we're saying, which we're seeing at the moment. And even since we've written the pamphlet, so around the autumn of last year, this is a crisis which is deepening and actually getting far worse, and I think, than what many people are kind of realizing. And in January, the World Meteorological Organization confirmed that 2023 was the warmest on record by a huge margin, approaching the 1.5 degrees of warming threshold, which is enshrined in the Paris Climate Agreement. And as the UN keep consistently saying, we are not breaking records, we are shattering records all over the place, whether it's just on increased heat, whether it's rising sea levels, glacier melt, across the board. And you may well have seen last week a Guardian survey of climate experts that said this target, so the 1.5 degrees target, is now unreachable, with one South African scientist saying, I expect a semi-dystopian future with substantial pain and suffering for the people of the global South. The world's response to date is reprehensible. We live in an age of fools. And I think that's a very poignant statement, because when we also think about nuclear power as well within that context, it goes back to this idea about, we are replicating the mistake of something we've already got vast experience on. But as we go on to say in the pamphlet, one of the problems with this, and I think it's one of the points made by some of the scientists as well about this whole targets of 1.5 degrees, this debate is very much caught up within the electoral politics, both of the Labour Party and obviously the Tory Party rolling back on their green policies. And certainly for the Labour Party and the Green Prosperity Plan and the policy for a fairer, greener future in favour of fiscal rules over what climate scientists are telling us, and the need to stand on the basis of credible climate policy. So rather than Rachel Reeves's speeches around secure economics, as she's termed it, the Labour Party see no contradiction in their unwavering support for nuclear power as a critical part of the UK's energy mix. And again, as we go on to highlight in the pamphlet, it's not always been the position of the Labour Party, and it was just 20 years ago when, under the Labour Party's Sustainable Development Commission, who voiced the same concerns that we had today, that they determined we did not need nuclear power, and the Labour Party was not supporting that. But there was a sudden U-turn under the Blair government, and thanks to Phil Johnson, his colleague Andy Sterling, have really gone on to highlight, and dig down into the research of why there was such a U-turn at that time. And I think we can only understand that, and I'm sure what Phil's going to go on to elaborate on, is the links with nuclear weapons and the defence programme, and the need to cross-fertilise across civilian and defence sectors as well. But I mean, some of those concerns, again, which we highlight, obviously around technology lock-in, the diversion of investment away from the things we need to be doing, such as investment in renewable energies and a mass retrofit program. Just to put that simply, I know it means more than that. Intergenerational legacy, the burdens we're leaving for future generations. And it always strikes me that, you know, with the climate strikes in 2019, that was one of the things the young climate strikers were always emphasizing, is that, you know, we were leaving this legacy for them in terms of climate change. And that's exactly what nuclear power would be doing as well. Obviously, there's the waste disposal issues, there's the safety and increased risk of nuclear weapons proliferation. And on the costs, we've already seen, so the first nuclear plant to be built in you know, decades at Hinkley Point C in the southwest. Again, we're told at the beginning of this year that that's now expected to be delayed, the first reactor there, until 2029 at the earliest. I think forecasts are more around 2031, and costs are now rising again by the billions to £46 billion. We know the government's already struggling with financing of Sizewell C in Suffolk on the coast, which itself is at risk of climate change. And as we point out in the pamphlet, this will be the first plant that will be developed under the new Nuclear Energy Financing Act 2022, which means a regulated asset-based model of funding. So that's where energy consumers and taxpayers will be taking on the risk upfront. So socialising the risk and privatising the profits, as we might say in shorthand. So, of course, when we go on from there, so we've got the cost issue, we've got the safety issue. Of course, there has been historically some major nuclear catastrophes, obviously Fukushima, where now they're dangerously releasing radioactive water into the oceans. We've still got the legacies of Chernobyl and so on. So whilst, yes, there is some good safety records around nuclear, they still pose enormous safety risks to us. And of course, the whole waste disposal element remains unanswered and still remains a problem. And I was just horrified to see last week, I think it was, some industry spokespeople talking around small modular reactors and complaining about the highly regulated nature of nuclear power, and that we needed to relax this so we could move ahead with small modular reactors, because this is what's holding back some of the investment. So in terms of the nuclear accidents, these are covered in the pamphlet as well, so I won't go into them here. I think the other side is obviously the links between the civilian and military nuclear power agenda, and which has been made clear within the government's roadmap to 2050, that these are being very much linked together now. And again, I'm sure others may go on to say more around this. So I just want to take the final few minutes, however, just to talk a little bit about the jobs issue, because of course that is the big question as a trade unionist, and it's the one confront all the time, that this means, you know, well-paid, highly skilled jobs, and that's why we need it. Now, you know, it has been said that these are obviously some of the most expensive jobs. I mean, Linda's going to talk about some of the construction side, so I'm not going to cover on that. But I think it's interesting in terms of nuclear power when we compare this, for example, of transitioning out of the fossil fuel sector. We have already got a declining nuclear power plants. They're due to be phased out in the 2030s, so we're not facing the same situation. There will be the ongoing unfortunate legacy of nuclear power for decades to come, which will obviously involve high levels of work in terms of decommissioning, etc. It does take away from other jobs that we need doing urgently in terms of decarbonisation across a number of sectors, including in transport and buildings, energy efficiency, renewable energy. So there are alternative pathways in terms of those jobs there. And of course, nuclear skills in terms of some of the very high levels of nuclear skills will be needed very far into the future. So I think, as we conclude in the pamphlet, nuclear power is a dangerous mistake, as we elaborate on there. And I think we have to keep up the pressure to get Labour to commit to end its support for nuclear energy. We're not calling for any worker to be made redundant, of course, and we would support those transitions within the broad concepts of the Just Transition framework, that there is support for all workers. And that we also take this debate out more widely and obviously confront the vested interests that there are around nuclear power. And I think, as we say in the pamphlet, the debate on nuclear and its role in tackling climate change and energy security is not a new one. We've been here before, and in fact, I've got a really interesting, very old pamphlet from the late 1970s about trade unions and nuclear power, when again these debates were happening, and actually the Labour movement was shifting away from nuclear power for very much the same reasons as we're discussing now. And we need to continue this debate and make sure we're having discussions like these, and to really highlight and try and convince as much as well, just to conclude, the environmental movement as well, and those within CND who oppose nuclear weapons, that there can be no place for nuclear at all. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And just a reminder to participants in the webinar to put questions to our panelists in the Q&A function. Have a think about that now before you maybe forget a question particularly directed at Sam. In addition to the live participants, I should welcome anyone watching this later on YouTube. This will be uploaded to our YouTube site. If you weren't able to join us during the event to put questions, do subscribe to Labour CND's email list and get updates from Labour CND about our activities. We do a number of events like this. Okay, so I'll move on now to our second speaker, Linda Clark. Linda is Emeritus Professor at the University of Westminster and co-founder of the Centre for the Study of the Production of the Built Environment, as well as the European Institute for Construction Labour Research. She's worked closely with the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers and has carried out numerous research projects on employment and working conditions, vocational education and training, equality and net zero in the construction industry, and she has a presentation for us. So over to Linda.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak, which I'm pleased to do, because I think often construction sectors rather doesn't get a good enough focus in relation to the whole discussion about nuclear. I've got a presentation which I'll put up if I can. Let me find a slide. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
I better get rid of, I've got a whole profile in the corner. I don't know how to get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? Anyway, not to worry. I'm going to talk about the whole construction process involved in nuclear. And as you see here, there's two photos from Hinkley Point, from which you can see just what a big chunk of the earth it's taking up. And but I'll say more about that as I go along. How do I get this to move on? Oh, there. So I'm going to talk about the construction industry, and really it's a very problematic industry generally, in that almost all the firms are very small or even micro firms. There is an incredible problem of self-employment or bogus self-employment that's been kind of percolating for decades now. despite the union constantly wanting to get rid of it. The lately has got even worse in terms of vocational education and training because of the insistence by government on an employer-based system and marginalizing the unions in terms of training. And given this very fragmented employment structure, it means that there's very poor work-based training infrastructure, which has led in turn to a great decline in construction apprenticeships, despite the Construction Industry Training Board still existing as a statutory levy-based system. Most construction trainees, in fact, you'll find full-time in FE colleges. I'm saying all this because it's rather important context for understanding the whole engineering construction process, which is really what nuclear construction or the construction of nuclear power stations is. Of course, we know that it's also a very white male workforce and few young people to be found increasingly, and has great problems in historically of blacklisting, actually mainly to a large extent from the engineering construction area, particularly from power station construction and disputes on that, etc. So it's a very factional industry, these professional silos, divided trades, enormous use of agency labor only subcontracting, and long supply chains that mean that it's very difficult to get integrated team working. So, and the other final problem is this poor level of unionization. Now, I'm saying all this because the engineering construction industry is an enormous contrast. And we should bear this in mind because it's a very important reason why the unions are always very ambiguous about engineering construction. What we see in in this sector, as it's called engineering construction, just for those who aren't aware, engineering construction is really related to steel. The picture here, by the way, is of Sizewell, but it's all about oil and gas, power stations, nuclear. This is actually the definition, and it's also to do with decommissioning, of course, of nuclear power stations, but petrochemical plants, pharmaceutical, and waste and water sectors, like, for instance, the Edmonton incinerator should really come under engineering, or many incinerators schemes come under the engineering construction sector. So what is important about, I mean, there's lots of, so they're very big projects. They encompass a range of disciplines: civil and structural engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. So pretty highly skilled workforce involved in this, and pipe fabricators, etc., and of course logistics, not to mention logistics. But the important fact is it all comes under what is called the NICI agreement, National Agreement for the Engineering Construction Industry, which covers about 188,000 workers. And it also has its own statutory training board, the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, which is, again, is a levy grant system. So very different, really, from the rest of the construction area in many respects, and which makes it rather popular with the unions. Now, here's just to give you an insight into what the NICI agreement is. It's a centralized agreement. It was established in 1981, really, because there was a load of disputes on many of the power stations at the time, particularly including, for instance, Sizewell A. And so throughout the 60s and 70s, there were a load of problems the government was faced with on these projects. And so finally, the agreement came in as a centralized agreement, largely based on direct employment and having good employment and working conditions. And the recognition, I mean, that's what's important too, I think, if we think about Hinkley Point, there's of new ways of working, such as integrated team working. That's all built into the agreement. And they also have special project agreement and project joint councils for each project. I've attended some in Sellafield, and so heavy, very strong union involvement in all these projects, and including having a national shop stewards, engineering, construction industry shop stewards forum, where shop stewards from all the different power stations come together regularly. That was set up in 2003, and it's mainly, of course, GMB and Unite that attend it. And I'm not saying that this has been without disputes, it's the whole sector, because, I mean, you will probably remember the Lindsay dispute. But generally, certainly Hinkley Point, and I'm going to come on now to Hinkley Point. Hinkley Point, as Sam said, it's estimated to cost now about 46 billion, and to take at least another 4 years. It's regarded, it has its centres of excellence in terms of training. So Hinkley's got enormous advantages, particularly for the unions, because EDF has been very accommodating. And so it's had a big training program and upskilling in these centres of excellence that have been set up. In welding, electrical, mechanical, and construction area, claims to have 1,320 apprentices that have gone through it. Actually, when I look this up, I mean, I must find more detail of who these are, but they seem to flag up hospitality, surveying, and accountancy, which doesn't seem to match what I would have expected, which would have been electrical particularly. It claims to have provided 30,000 training places and 4,500 in the next 12 months, and to have employed about 10,000 local people. I'll say something about this because, I mean, the whole point about nuclear power stations is that they generally are pretty isolated in terms of the locality, particularly because of the dangers involved. And so I think mostly, and this is quite an interesting aspect, it relies on, and this is indicated by the fact that they've set up a workers' campus. It relies on a travelling workforce, a mobile workforce. So, in fact, I think it was Langeroth was given 125 million contract to build a workers' campus at the site and in Bridgewater that provides I've said that again, single living accommodation for about 1,500 workers. So that this is some indication that, in fact, it is relies very much on a travelling workforce. There's been disputes, of course, and there's been some quite heated disputes, particularly over de-skilling, shift patterns, and interestingly enough, travel allowances, given the reliance of much of the workforce on travelling, what's called travelling money, travellers' money. And training standards has been another point. But EDF has done an enormous amount to encourage women to have equality measures. In fact, I've been involved with a round table with EDF and Unite about bringing women into construction, particularly at Hinkley. But then let's just not forget that overall carbon dioxide emissions are likely to be, now I'm not sure I understand what this is, so those who are an expert in what carbon emissions, how you measure them, can no doubt take this on board. So, and also, of course, these projects are all relying largely on concrete construction, which in itself is a problem for the environment. So Sizewell C at the moment estimated 20 billion, and EDF has just been contracted for that. Now, I've been to Sellafield a couple of times, and to Sizewell for that matter, and they employ 8,000 people still there, which may sound a bit surprising given that it hasn't produced energy for years because it's been decommissioned. And this is another big problem, of course, with nuclear power stations. They don't go away. And At the moment, it treats different grades of waste, some very dangerous, which is transported, for instance, from Sizewell by train. So that's always been an issue, this treatment of waste and waste there. In fact, at the moment, there is also something of a scare about leaks at radioactive leaks at Sellafield. So I'll just finish really by pointing to these dilemmas and problems with nuclear power station construction. Now, I mean, the argument about the Nicky agreement, that it brings good employment and working conditions, a good consideration for upskilling and continuing training of the workforce, really that should apply throughout the industry. I mean, that should be the argument. Not that it should be confined to something like engineering, construction, or, and I should have said this, the other area which has a relatively strong unionization basis is the local authorities, particularly the DLOs, the direct labour organisations, building departments of local authorities. So there's these two areas which are really much more concentrated unionisation than the rest of the whole industry. The reliance on the mobile workforce, I think, is a very important factor and problem. At the moment, many who are employed in Hinckley, it's envisaged they'll move to Sizewell. Now, I mean, there is this attraction of travelling money, but I can't help feeling that it's a bit of an old-fashioned way. That, you know, you think of the 50s and 60s with these camps set up and this mobile workforce, single men. And so, you know, having these large, isolated projects with people working like mad because they're away from home and they're making a lot of money. They're away from their families. So that's another key point, I think, and key problem, I think, with this kind of method of construction. Not to mention the massive carbon emissions, because it relies on concrete production, and concrete is contributes to 4.4 to 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Massive costs, of course. I mean, flag this up. It's terrible to think about it. But I think another really important point is that these projects are limited in terms of their length, how long they live. And that's why we now have Sizewell C and Hinckley C, because they've been through, you know, Sizewell A, B, A started in the 50s. So they have about a life of about 30 years. And that's not to say that the actual construction will only last for 30 years, but the actual reactor at the center has a limited life. So we have to then build another one of these things. But so it's not that they go on forever. And that once they're decommissioned, of course, as I pointed out with Sellafield, it still employs an enormous workforce just to keep it going. And there's a continued maintenance of it. So it seems a waste almost to have built these gigantic structures and then after 30 years we're building another one. The other point about it is that they kill communities. I mean, no industry settles near a nuclear power plant. And so in a way, the communities around are killed off in some ways. There's a danger of leakages. I've already said that about Sellafield, this radioactive waste at the moment, there's a fear about that, and about cracks in the concrete. And finally, it's not about energy reduction at all. This is about assuming that we go on consuming the same amount of energy, whereas if we put the same kind of money into retrofit, we would be at the same time reducing energy consumption. So really, it is nuclear versus renewables, and the potential, for instance, for local authority DLOs, which are another unionised sector, to be really taking this on board to begin with anyway. So I'll finish there, and I hope that was helpful. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thank you. It was more than helpful. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. We'll move swiftly on, but with the caveat, do put more questions in the Q&A. We've had some come in, but I'm sure there'll be more on the back of that presentation and the next one. So now, Phil Johnston is a Senior Research Fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. He has worked on a number of projects related to the energy transitions and sustainability, and is a member of the Sussex Energy Group. He's been involved in a long-running research on nuclear power with Andy Sterling, who was mentioned earlier. That has documented the interdependencies between civil and military nuclear activities. Phil is also a patron of the excellent Nuclear Information Service. And Phil also has a presentation. Phil, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to share a screen and hopefully it will all work out. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's all good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, it's great to be here, and congratulations on a great report. And I'm going to be rattling through some slides on the links between the UK's sort of obsession, really, with civil nuclear power that's been going on for some time now, this nuclear renaissance. And really the core point is that increasingly this civil nuclear obsession is kind of inexplicable if we look at the economics, if we look at the progress of renewables and all these kind of things. And what we've documented over the years is really, to understand what's driving this, we have to look at the military. The new aspect of this really is that we're in a very different environment now, because this year the government has essentially admitted these links in the nuclear roadmap at the beginning of the year. And this was a big change from the past 10 years, where these links have been obfuscated or indeed denied. So just to get going really then, is this idea that there's something strange going on with the UK and civil nuclear power. You get these extraordinary statements from government ministers that there's no limit to how much nuclear capacity they're going to build. It's what the government is all about for the next 20 years. But of course, this isn't just confined to the Conservative Party, of course. This is something that really runs across Westminster. You're really, except from the odd critical MP here or there really is no kind of deviation from this obsession to build nuclear, and nothing in relation to the delays and the cost increases seem to change this. And it, as I say, it really doesn't make any sense, because as we know, if we look at the contracts for difference, taking into account inflation that have been made for nuclear, they are incredibly expensive, and much more so than those for offshore wind, and definitely for onshore wind and solar and all kinds of alternatives. And, you know, there's all kinds of things being done with electricity grids now in terms of energy efficiency and demand management investments that really can reduce CO2 emissions significantly more cheaply and faster than nuclear can. And the thing is, this trend really it's international. These are the sort of levelized cost of electricity published by Lazard, showing the incredible reductions in costs that have happened with renewables over the past 10 years. Meanwhile, the cost of nuclear has gone up. Indeed, the nuclear costs have risen by 26%, while wind costs have fallen by 70%, solar by 89%. And there's other justifications that are routinely used for nuclear. One of the famous ones is this idea of base load, that you need this firm supply of centralized, constantly always on power stations like nuclear as an essential part of an electricity grid. But increasingly, grid managers are kind of saying that this idea is outdated, and it's been confirmed by a Royal Society report in 2023, which showed that the scenarios with the inclusion of nuclear tended to be more expensive than those with less or no nuclear. So this is kind of the emerging picture, and there's now a plethora of peer-reviewed articles outlining 100% renewable scenarios and all the rest of it. And the curious thing is that the government are very reluctant, it seems, to actually publish comparable costs of levelized cost of electricity. And the last time this was properly done was back in 2016, where it was first acknowledged the nuclear was more expensive than alternatives. But curiously, for example, the 2020 white paper and so on, the sort of nuclear costs are just not discussed at all. And this is a very odd thing to do, because it's usual practice in these energy papers to actually do comparative analysis. And, you know, we see that, you know, even under, even with pessimistically high costs of variability, that renewables are far less costly than nuclear power. Yet the UK government remains so committed. And, you know, another thing to point out, actually, before I get on to why, is that, you know, in 2008, when the sort of nuclear renaissance was launched, you know, it was all about keeping costs low and security of supply. And, you know, we know what's happened, which is that no new nuclear has been built. You know, Gordon Brown wanted 8 new reactors by 2020. This was considered to be essential to keep the lights on and all the rest of it. Every prediction that was made by government and official policymakers, all these certainties about the need for nuclear, it just didn't happen. What happened instead was nuclear got very expensive, was delayed, renewables got cheaper and were built. And, you know, it's extraordinary that at the beginning of the decade, it was 10% electricity generation from renewables. We're now above 40%. So it's quite clear what works. So the question is, what's going on? Why is there this relentless enthusiasm for nuclear? And yeah, you guessed it. The bottom line is it's about a hidden UK military nuclear subsidy. That is that in order to maintain the industrial capacities, the supply chains, the skills that you need to build nuclear-powered submarines that underpin the deterrent, you need to build civil nuclear, and that covers some of the costs. And this relates to this underlying part of the UK's identity, really, about its need, apparent need for nuclear weapons, which is really so core to Westminster. Many people say, well, the military links are a thing of the past. People know about the history and how the civil program came out, the military program. What we've documented is with this nuclear renaissance, there's, if you look at the military documents rather than civil documents, you can see ideas that the challenge is to try and mask the costs of military, nuclear and civil programs. And in 2014, there was a secret report that was only obtained from Freedom of Information request on the UK's nuclear submarine program, which outlined that the government should seek imaginative methods to better engage with the civil new build program, to leverage to maximum effect civil nuclear investment, use other nuclear facilities, including those in the civil sector. So it's really quite clear what's going on here. And Rolls-Royce have been very clear in 2017. They build the reactors for submarines, and in their small modular reactor document, they said that an advantage of SMRs would be to relieve the MOD of the burden of developing and retaining skills and capability on the military side. We submitted evidence in 2017 to Hinckley C inquiry, where it was confirmed by the lead civil servant at the MOD that indeed a benefit of the civil program was to support submarines, and it would require coordinated government action to do this. Government ministers have referred to the distinction between civil and military as artificial. And then everything changed with the civil nuclear roadmap in 2024. Because despite those statements I showed you earlier, there's often been a tendency when the question is directly asked that there's actually been denial by government, which seems kind of contradictory, but that's what was happening. In 2024, it was different because the nuclear roadmap identifies shared ambitions and the importance of aligning civil and defence nuclear. And as I say, as recently as 2021, these links were still being denied. And this is the crucial point, really, which is if we care about democracy, for the past 10 years, this hidden agenda for civil nuclear has not been openly discussed and scrutinized. It's an international picture. If you look at nuclear weapon states, they tend to be the countries that are most intensely pursuing new nuclear build programs. And you can see it in statements from Emmanuel Macron in France that without civilian nuclear, no military nuclear. You see it in reports in the USA highlighting the interdependencies. And indeed, a report by the Atlantic Council has tried to estimate the annual value of human capital contributed to defense nuclear by civil nuclear. And so we thought we'd do the same. And this is the latest piece of the puzzle. And it's probably hard to see the details. But what we did was we basically tried to identify the entirety of the costs of what we call the singular UK nuclear complex, which includes civil nuclear and electricity consumers and the money they spend, as well as what the money the taxpayer spends. And we went through looking at all the annual budgets, and we estimated the share of the electricity consumers by looking at it as the overall profits of the electricity industry and looking at that in terms of 9 billion, which is 15%, which is the share of nuclear. And we then have come up with a very preliminary idea of the scale of the annual subsidy that could be flowing from civil to military nuclear. And we're going to have a report coming out on this soon. It's already been presented to the Foreign Commonwealth Office, which was interesting that it was invited to be presented there. So you can read more about it. But what we've estimated is that in terms of taxpayer and the energy bill revenues, which trickles into the supply chain, and perhaps to some of the things that Linda was mentioning in terms of the skills institute set up by EDF and all the rest of it, is that there is a subsidy of around, we estimate, 5 billion a year from civil to military nuclear. And the crucial point is, because of the cost of nuclear, this subsidy means that consumers' energy bills are higher. And in red there, you can see the cost of the same equivalent power if it was from renewables and storage, which is less. So electricity bills are inflated and kept higher than they need to be in order to have this flow of money from civil to military nuclear to support military infrastructures. And that's a very fast way of going through that, but it's a preliminary analysis, and we're hoping to generate more discussion around it and bottom it out. But the point is that it's clear now, beyond any doubt, that a central driver of civil nuclear is sustaining the nuclear submarine industry, which underpins the deterrent. That submarine capabilities are insupportable without civil nuclear infrastructures. Strong government support is because of these military interests. It's clear internationally this is the case. And crucially, these pressures have been hidden until now. And the whole rationale here is to try the Trident replacement or Dreadnought, whatever it's called now, is getting so outrageously expensive, it's potentially destabilizing the entirety of the MOD budget. So there's this pressure to try and cover some of these costs off the books of MOD budgets, and that's where civil nuclear and energy bill payers come in. And this evidence has been presented and never refuted. And it's quite clear that it is the case now. And really all we've asked for is that UK energy debates are attentive to this issue, that it's discussed and scrutinised in Parliament and all these kind of things. Because ultimately, whether it's nuclear weapons or civil nuclear, the fact that these costs were hidden for so long really raises serious questions for the health of British democracy overall. So that's a very rapid run through of that, but I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Another excellent presentation, which makes me think that CND should have a new slogan: save on your energy bills, join CND today. And if you aren't a member of CND, you should join on the CND website or via an old-fashioned membership form. Thanks for all the contributions in the questions. I'm just having another one coming through at this moment, which I'm going to try and read properly. Not surprisingly, it's for Phil, as I would expect one of the more recent ones to be. But going back, I think looking at the time, what I will do is I'm going to read out some of the questions we've had so far and then invite panelists to come in and deal with any answers they feel they can. So the first question from Tom Cuthbert, very niche question. How can we best relate the cost of living crisis issues to nuclear modernisation and its obvious injustice from the Nuclear Energy Financing Act? I don't know if anyone can assist with that. Martin Franklin asks about basically attitudes in the trade union movement. What are the prospects and obstacles to shifting unions from seeing nuclear power as essential to their membership? Is just transition and that attitude making any gains in the movement? In the alternative, are fears about the decline of jobs in fossil fuels increasing their commitment to nuclear? So that's a question from Martin Franklin. And Linda Rogers asks kind of a retrospective on EDF's presentations and getting things wrong. How could EDF have got its figures so wrong for workers needed? At the time of the development consent order, it was predicted to peak workforce at 5,600, but now reaching 15,000. Does that make a nonsense of the development consent order process? There's a couple more questions, but if I go round the panel, shall I start? Sam, do you want to say anything about any of those? I'm wondering if the question about the situation in the trade union movement is particularly directed to you.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That was the one I was gonna come back on. I think that the GMB and their position particularly is quite difficult and across a number of areas. Just they have strong support for obviously the nuclear sector, and of course they are also involved on the defence side as well, so it's not just the civilian side. But the main unions, GMB Unite and Prospect Union, are the ones that are mostly kind of represented in nuclear. I think the just transition narrative, unfortunately, it is very difficult, and yeah, I'd probably try and summarize this very quickly. I think because of what we've seen, particularly in Scotland and with offshore wind and renewables, there are some justifiable criticisms about jobs not that not translating into jobs within the yards in Scotland, for example, and the GMB particularly have raised this now. Yeah, I'm not talking about there should be British jobs for British workers, but it is a bit of a nonsense that we're building renewable, sort of wind turbines and then dragging them across the oceans from Indonesia and places and erecting them in the North Sea. But the trouble is that has bred complete cynicism that therefore we should have no just transition, and it doesn't exist. We should push ahead with, in this case, obviously oil and gas drilling in the North Sea, but I think that translate across to nuclear as well. And I think one of the problems is, and Linda's presentation highlighted it a bit really, that it's a good area for the unions. It's a good area for organising around nuclear. There is good health and safety agreements by and large. There is some good contracts there, and particularly when you do get to some of the more specialist functions, obviously, it's hard for unions to say that they want to get rid of those jobs in the same way as oil and gas to some extent. But I think it goes back to the point that what we've always argued, this has been a declining industry now. And I've never been able to get to the bottom of this, and if anybody has the answer, it'd be fantastic. But given that plants will at some stage in their life be decommissioned, what discussions happen with unions during that process of when the agreements are put in place? Because we know that it will come to the end of its natural life at some point. So I think it's a very difficult one in terms of nuclear, compared to the discussion around oil and gas, which itself is fraught with a number of difficulties. But yeah, perhaps I'll just leave it there to allow others to come in. Thanks.
Okay, and Linda, do you want to come in with any of those?
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
I think one point in relation to what Martin asked is that there isn't one trade union movement in a way. I mean, and particularly if we take a union like Unite, Unite is a merger of UCAT and a lot of other areas, including all the building services areas, which were has a long history, particularly electricians. So in fact, I think the electricians are going to be the answer to a just transition, because I think we always need to break this down a bit, and they are one of the key occupations involved. And of course they have this long checkered history, going back to when they were communist dominated, and then of course we had chapel and we had a whole history of the electricians. But they are a really critical area, particularly also for renewables. And also I should add that of the blacklisted, I don't know whether you remember the whole blacklisting crisis that went on and still goes on. They're largely electricians. So we should think about the just transition, particularly in relation to electricians, because they are key also to any kind of energy construction, really. So that's one thought. I should actually have said that a lot of the work I've been doing was with Ian Fitzgerald from Northumbria University and on nuclear power station construction. I should have said that earlier, but I'll finish with that for the moment.
Thanks very much. And Phil, well, bringing you in, shall I mention a question from another Linda in our participants? Don't the government's business departments levelized costs show that nuclear power is not value for money as required for the designation of RAB? I think that's an acronym for regulatory asset base. Can this not be a challenge to RAB? Also, the subsidy of 5 billion from consumers would be breaking a RAB agreement. I don't know if that's something you can help with, as well as the other questions posed.
Yeah, thanks. I'll go for that question first. I think it's a really great point, actually, Linda. And if I'm thinking back to how this has kind of been justified, actually, in terms of because the NAO released a report, I remember, on the sort of costs of Hinkley C, probably back in 2017, I think, when it was realised that this was extremely expensive. And I think the government's response was to sort of almost basically change the rules of the game, and they started pointing towards these what were called strategic benefits in terms of jobs and employment, and basically using other criteria for justifying the development. And actually, I remember at the time that this phrase that the NEO picked up on, that there was other strategic benefits to Hinkley C, but they weren't actually clearly defined, was a bit of a hint as to that some of those strategic benefits could have been defence. But in terms of the levelized cost, I think what you point towards is part of the reason that the government doesn't publish them in the white paper anymore, is because it is kind of embarrassing, I suppose, if they were to publish it, and instead they're trying to justify it on other grounds. I suppose part of the way they might get round this is by their projections that nuclear would be much cheaper with RAB. So the thing with the economics is you can always just kind of make your own projections and justify it that way. So, but it's a great point, and maybe that could be a way to challenge it. But I'll have to go and speak to RAB experts like Steve Thomas and those types to see what he thinks about that. In terms of the actual subsidy, and if that could be a challenge to RAB, again, I think the government would probably deny the sort of the scale of the subsidy, or that it is inflating bills, because they try and justify it in terms of evaluations of system benefits of operating nuclear power and all kinds of things. So there'd probably be, again, kind of maneuvers done to contest it. But we'll see. Hopefully, when this report comes out properly, we can see how it can be picked up and maybe used to challenge the RAB. So thanks for pointing out that. I'll leave that there, because I've gone on for quite a long time.
That's okay. It's 2 minutes past 8, so I don't want to go on too long, but we've got 2 more really good questions. So if I can have everyone's indulgence, I'm going to at least mention them, even if we don't get massive answers now. Firstly, Ray Street mentions absolutely massive issue that I think the supporters of nuclear power have to deal with, but we must never forget either. At the moment, the fuel used is uranium, which has its own problems, not only with uranium mining, which kill people and will eventually run out. The question, but now it's being posed that we use, I hope I pronounce this right, thorium. So question for Phil mainly, would the use of thorium have the same problems with the link with nuclear weapons? And then we've got a question about carbon emissions from Mike Bird, which is are there any figures for emissions caused by building and decommissioning and dismantling nuclear power? Obviously, I think we heard about the carbon emissions in concrete construction, but some question about the kind of the life cycle use of carbon emissions, as well as kind of its ongoing use. So I don't know if there's anyone. I'll go to Phil first, because there's one directed at him, and then if either Sam or Linda want to respond to either of those questions as well, I'll take them, and then maybe we'll wrap up. So Phil, could you deal with Ray's question?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Thorium. Yeah, well, again, I'll be cautious because I'm not a thorium expert, but my understanding is that thorium, it can be sort of bombarded with neutrons and produce uranium-233, which can in turn be made into explosive materials. So I'm cautious because once you get into the technicalities of these things, it can be tricky. But my understanding is that explosive material still could be made. The other thing is, my understanding from the academic literature is that a massive problem with thorium remains to be the cost associated with it. So I don't see it really as being a competitor to pressurized water reactors using uranium at the moment. So.
Thank you. And Linda and Sam, can either of you assist with any of the questions that have not been covered elsewhere? Linda?
Well, I mean, certainly carbon emissions doesn't go away. Because we're now talking about, 3 generations of nuclear power construction, power stations. But I think another point that's perhaps we should really focus on is the waste, because that is a real problem. And I mean, particularly, I mean, the most dangerous waste tends to be shipped away somewhere. Not quite clear where. The waste is graded different ways, and some of it's buried, and some of it's, but it doesn't ever go away. So I think, as well as carbon emissions, we really have to think about this whole problem of radioactive waste. That doesn't really answer the question, but never mind.
No, thanks very much. I'm gonna let Sam have the last word, the author of our pamphlet. We have got a late question, which is very long, and I'm just seeing if I can reduce it at all in the limited time we've got left. Well, I'm skim reading the question, but basically, is there a good way we can encourage good value of things like the 7 tidal barriers, tidal electricity generating, and promoting alternatives as opposed to the ever increasing costs of Hinckley. So there's a question: how do we make this case moving forward? I suppose is a summary of the alternatives. Sam Mason, you're the author of our pamphlet. Why don't you have the last word? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I'm just quickly going to say something on the life cycle of emissions, because I think that's always a really complicated question. And I know Dr. Ian Fairley at CND has done some work around this as well. So perhaps we can sort of direct to Ian Fairley's website, but it depends what you include and don't include in those, and probably a bit like some of the economics sometimes, and the thing that Phil's pointed out, you can come up with whatever figures you want to suit your arguments at times. But yeah, just on that last question, I did see that come up in the chat, and I think perhaps just to go back to what I said at the beginning about vested interest and being accused of pickled ideologies, or whatever trade unions have accused us of. They always say, I remember, and this is a common sort of slogan as well in government, that they don't pick winners. Well, they absolutely do pick winners for them. They try to make out that this is some kind of neutral process, and I think it's been highlighted tonight, this is very much not a neutral process, and the energy we choose is very much linked to the vested interests of those behind it, of governments, corporations, etc. It's not actually linked to, and going back to the early questions around the cost of living crisis, if we were really making sensible choices, rational choices based on costs and the climate crisis, we wouldn't be going down the nuclear route. And you can read as many papers as well that that there's a paper from the Union Concerned Scientists in the US last week, I think it was, that said, even if we agreed with the technology in small modular nuclear reactors, they're going to do nothing to solve the climate crisis. And I think we have to go back and Ray, apologies again that I always forget to mention this about uranium mining, and obviously that this is largely comes on indigenous lands, and one reason why the Australian trade unions have always been heavily opposed to nuclear as well. So I think, just as a last word, it's been really great personally to have Linda and Phil in this and sort of bring the links across these two agendas of nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and the construction side. And Linda picked me up immediately when she read the pamphlet and said we hadn't mentioned stuff on construction. I think really important. That's a lesson for us all to make sure we bring that in as well as a way we've more started to bring in, obviously, those crossover links that Phil has highlighted between the nuclear weapons programme. And, you know, perhaps we can finish on thinking on Daniel's slogan about, you know, save energy and saving your energy bills and sign up to CND, because this is an argument we need to start winning on fast. And thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all our speakers who have been fantastic. Do look out for the video on YouTube if you want to catch up and make notes that you didn't make at the time and so on. Share that with others. And you can buy the Labour CND pamphlet on the Labour CND website. You can get a digital copy sent to you. If you come to in-person CND events, I'm sure you'll see people selling it there. So thanks very much, everyone. And I hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you very much.